Hello and welcome to Indie Designer Journal episode 25. Thank you very much for stopping by. We hit sort of a milestone, 25 episodes in. I really didn't know if I would make this many videos in this series, but there's been a lot of support for them, and I've actually really enjoyed making them. Another milestone we passed about a month and a half ago when we hit 1,000 subscribers. I think we're at a little over 1,100 subscribers now, so I truly appreciate everyone who has subscribed. Today we're going to be taking a look at the beginning process of designing a game from how I do it, basically. So usually starts for me brainstorming just within my head, just kind of what I want to do. But the first tangible thing that I'll do is I'll break out one of my notebooks. I have quite a few of these composition books. That's my preferred method of writing down notes. So I usually just get a ballpoint pen and write down notes, usually some illustrations of some things, and get a rough idea of what I want the game to be comprised of, usually some basic component counts and things of that nature. And we're going to turn this camera around in a minute, and we're going to look at the first 2 pages of design work for the upcoming Dustrunner. Dustrunner will be my next game in the Tin series. And when we turn the camera around, you'll get a glimpse at the mechanics that will be in play and sort of my thought process. You'll get an idea of where I begin. So maybe that will be helpful to some of you who are designers yourselves to get sort of an idea of where or how I begin my design process. And it could be interesting to those out there who are just basically interested in my design process overall. Before we get into that, I would like to say very quickly that I appreciate all of the support that I've gotten over the past week and a half or so. About a week and a half, I had some bad personal news that came into my life, and it was a very difficult thing for me to process. Some of you may know over the past 2.5 years or so, I've been dealing with all sorts of things in my personal life, most notably a divorce, which came with all sorts of complications and baggage that is pretty common for most people. I'm not unique in that sense, but I just had a really difficult day a couple weeks ago, and I actually contemplated being done with designing altogether. I actually went so far as to post on social media that I was done with Gray Gnome Games, but that was very short-lived. In fact, within 12 hours, I did an about face and reached out to my fans and basically said that, hey, look, I'm going through a difficult time and I'm going to maybe take it a little bit slower. But my brain works a certain way. I love to design. Being creative is just how I get through life. I love designing games. I love writing. I love illustration and painting. Being creative, I think, is one of the greatest gifts that I have in my life. So there's no way I could possibly ever stop doing what I'm doing. So basically, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who reached out to me and showed your love and support, because it really did help me realize and see exactly, in some ways, the hole that I could potentially be leaving if I were to stop designing. And that meant an extreme amount to me. Sometimes I think we lose sight of how important the things are that we do, and it was really a wake-up call for me. So really my point in all of this that I'm verbalizing is that if you're a designer or a creative person or whatever it is that you're doing in your life, realize that you are loved and that what you do is important, so that to the point in which that people will realize if you stop doing it. And that's what I noticed. I saw such an outpouring from everyone out there, and I really felt that I needed to say something and verbalize it. So that's what I'm doing right now. So I really do appreciate all of your support, and I'm looking forward to creating more games and sharing them with you and making these videos. So without wasting any more time, let's turn the camera around and take a look at the next game in the Gray Gnome library. Hello and welcome to the table. What we have here in front of us is the first 2 pages for my next design, Dustrunner. And I sort of thought it would be fun, or interesting at least, to all of you out there to see how my design process starts. And like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, normally it's in my head. Obviously, I don't just start writing stuff down. For the most part, I do have a sense or an idea of what I want the game to be and do, and usually I set there's some sort of restrictions that are in play, typically components. So I knew going into Dustrunner what I wanted. I wanted a game that played like Desolate, because I had quite a few people asking for a tin series version of Desolate, and in some ways I feel like I did that with Tin Helm, but Tin Helm was more in line with Iron Helm in theme especially, but it introduced sort of some new mechanics as far as how you explored. And if you played both Tin Helm and Iron Helm, you'll know the core mechanics are quite different. So I wanted to create something more in line with that of actually Desolate and Iron Helm as far as mechanically, but was also in a tin, and I felt it really needed a different direction for theme. And I haven't designed anything as of yet that was cyberpunk or post-apocalyptic, and that is what I wanted to do. So I came up with the idea of doing a game called Dustrunner, and that name just sort of came out of nowhere. I was sort of thinking I wanted something that was after the nuclear war, the earth was sort of destroyed, and I thought of Mad Max, and I thought of the dust and being kicked up from all of the vehicles driving around in this sort of desert aftermath. And then I thought also of cyberpunk or sci-fi type movies like like Blade Runner. So the idea of being in some sort of hodgepodge vehicle traversing the deserts of the aftermath of some sort of nuclear holocaust or something along that lines was sort of where my mind wanted to go. I'm a huge fan of early punk rock music, and bands like Iron Maiden, like especially their early stuff. So I wanted something that sort of had this sort of feel of being situated in the late 70s, early 90s. Late 70s, early 80s. So the idea of Dustrunner came up. Basically, you're kicking up dust, you're traveling through the desert, and there has to be some sort of meaning to what you're doing. So I thought, let's add something that wasn't in some of my previous games, and that is some sort of racing mechanic. So we'll get to that in a minute, but let's first touch on how I basically start writing in these journals. So I always start with writing the title or whatever it is I'm working on. And then often I will write component restrictions. So for the case of this game, I'm only going to be able to have 18 tin cards, or what they call tin cards at the Game Crafter. It's the larger cards that you'll find in my tin games, and then 32 mini cards. So that's not a lot. I also will have room in there, obviously, for some dice and other components. But that's sort of, I make sure to write that down, so when I start sort of brainstorming what I want or the things I want to add to the game, I have those restrictions right in front of me. So the first thing that I came up with is these map cards. Maybe we will kind of jump into that. Instead of having like in Desolate, where you had to find power cells to power up your escape shuttle and win the game, and in Iron Helm you had to reveal a certain number of plot cards that had the eye icons on them that triggered the end of the game, I thought it would be fun to introduce some sort of map where it feels like you're moving from one place to another. So there will be these cards that will be the larger cards, the tin cards, and it will be a way for you to go from node to node. From different cards will trigger this, and different choices that you make, and that in alone would be fun, I think. Instead of, so basically you'll have to get from point A to point B. If you get to point B, you win. If you die along the way, you lose. So that alone would be fun, but I thought, what if you're being chased? So there will be your vehicle traversing through and trying to get back to your home base. Maybe you were out on a scouting mission, or maybe there's another reason, but you're trying to get back to your home base before someone catches you, and that will be raiders. So there'll be like not just a raider, it'll be like the convoy of raiders that are after you, because maybe you stole something from them, or maybe you have some information or intel and they're trying to capture you. So you will be moving along this little map thing here, and this will be randomized at the beginning of each play. You'll always have a starting card and probably a finishing card. There'll be 5 cards total you'll be getting through, but the 3 in the middle can be mixed up, so each time you play it'll be a little bit different, and these will be revealed as you reach them. So you'll make decisions on paths that you're going on. You won't know exactly what the next card will be, which will add a little bit of a surprise. And I haven't yet decided if there will be things that happen at each one of these nodes. Most likely there will be. Things will be triggered. And I think that adds sort of a fun twist to the mechanics you've seen in play in some of my previous games. So now we have an idea of that. Let's move on. What else we have? So those are the 5 map cards that will be utilized. There'll be 10 cards I set aside for instructions. Likely I won't need to use all 10 of them for instruction cards, and if I don't need to, if I have any extra cards, I will use them as promotional cards. So that's how my brain works. I want to build my game and have everything in it that I need, and if I have anything left over, then I say, okay, I have a couple cards here, what do I want to do with them? Instead of just throwing them away, I make promotional cards for some of my other games. So look for maybe a gate or gates and or a tin helm sort of promotional card, probably going to be in here, because I likely won't use all 10 of those instruction cards. There will also be 3 of those large cards used to track your stats, which will be health, ammo, and fuel. And my early thoughts, it's not shown here, but my early thoughts on that will be you'll lay them out in such a way that you'll make like the outline of your vehicle, and you'll keep track of your health, your ammo, and your fuel. How does the engine of the game work? It's going to work very similar to that of Desolate, but there were some issues with Desolate because you would almost always want to skip enemies if it was the first card drawn. To correct that, this is this first idea I came up with, but then this is where I landed, is you'll have 12 cards in your exploration deck, and you will have a picture of what if it happens to be a conflict or an enemy. There'll be a picture, it'll say conflict, and there'll be a picture of an enemy, and each one will be different. So unlike Desolate, where it was the same alien illustration, I'll have a different illustration for each type of enemy. And if you draw the card as the first, if it's the first card and you're resolving it, this is the health you'll be adding to build your enemy. So if you play Desolate, you'll understand that there was, if you hit a conflict card, there was a dice icon that showed how much health that an alien had, and then you drew a conflict card that had another dice, and you added those together to create the total health for the enemy. So if you choose this as your, if this comes up as your first card and you choose to fight it, you will have to get this dice out and put it on the 2 side, place it down here, and then you will reveal one of these other cards we're going to get to in a minute, and it'll tell you how much health you need to add to it. So you won't know exactly how strong the enemy is, but you'll know that if you take it as the first card, it's going to have less health. Down here it says S. That means if you defeat this enemy as the first card, you will get a small loot or treasure. If you get the card as the second card, so say you skip whatever card came up first and you draw this as your second card, now you have to deal with the enemy that has a little bit more health, but the reward is a little bit more loot. You get a large crate, this would be a large crate in Desolate, but in this game will be a large chest or whatever it might happen to be. So that is how the enemies work. You will also, so there'll be 12 exploration cards. 5 of them will be conflict cards. There'll be cards very similar to some of the cards in Desolate that will give you stats. Will increase some of your health, your ammo, your fuel. There'll also be cards that will automatically allow you to advance on this track, and there'll be a card on here that will have the Raiders advance. Now, what is interesting when you're in a conflict and you're told to draw a card, you'll be drawing from this another separate deck here. Instead of calling it a conflict deck, this deck I don't have an exact name for. Right now I'm calling it a resolution deck, and what it does is tells you all sorts of things, and you'll be drawing from this deck for all sorts of reasons. This card has 5 outcomes on it, and all 12 of them will be different. This dice icon will be, if you're in a conflict, you'll draw from this deck, and this will be the die that you'll add to your health for to figure out the total health of your enemy. But it'll also tell you who goes first in combat, if it says Raider or yourself. So there'll be sort of an initiative thing here. There will also be how much damage your enemy does. So every time you don't defeat your enemy, if your enemy attacks first, you will then draw an additional card, and that's how much damage you take. So this card will tell you health, the damage the enemy does each time you draw one. It'll tell you who goes first. It will tell you things like if the enemy, after the combat, if you have the enemy's advance, and also is used to figure out loot. So if you have small loot, you will draw another card, not the first one, but you'll draw an additional card, and it'll tell you which loot you get. If you happen to get a large, you get to draw 2 cards and you get both those loots. Now sometimes it'll be just fuel, ammo, and health, but sometimes it'll be something greater, and that is mods. So there'll be mod cards. These are actually the icons I'll be using on these cards. Something similar to this. You'll have fuel, ammo, health, and mods. Mods will be 8 mod cards, and what they will be are basically what item cards were in Desolate. So sometimes you'll defeat an enemy and you'll get a mod, and you'll be able to make your vehicle either quicker or do different things or have defense or things along that nature. There'll be 8 different ones of those. At the beginning of the game, you'll draw 2 at random. So you'll start with 2 so that your vehicle will be different every time that you're playing the game. And that is essentially what Dustrunner is. And I hope that sounds interesting to you. If you have any ideas or thoughts, let me know. The really 2 big things here that are really going to separate this game from previous designs is this racing idea and the use of a multifunction card that I'm right now calling the resolution deck, that you're going to be cycling through to find out all sorts of information and make the game never the same. So every time you play it, enemies will be different. Outcomes of everything will be decided by this little deck of cards. And that's basically it. If you have any ideas or suggestions or thoughts, please leave comments below, and I thank you for stopping by.